This is a lecture from Friday, October 24th. The schedule got changed, so I was unable to see my second period today. So hopefully you can follow along, and if you have any questions regarding this lecture, then you can see me, ask me questions, and I can help you out with it. But pretty straightforward. I'm just going to go through the notes that I discussed today in class. So we ended, I believe, on dependent and independent factors. And our next slide is about our life history strategies or reproductive strategies. And basically, if you look at these two categories, they're labeled R selected and K selected. These are two very cut and dry categories that ecologists try to classify animals into. So R, if you remember, the lowercase r means growth rate. That's what we calculate. Our birth minus our death equals our R. And then K, if you remember, capital K is representing the carrying capacity. So a way that you can remember the difference between these two groups of organisms is that our selected species, they tend to hang around, or they tend to show a high growth rate, where K selected tend to hang around that carrying capacity. So some characteristics of both of these. In our selected species, they're going to end up having a high growth rate, like I said. R stands for growth rate, and K selected, they're going to have a slower growth rate. You can also interpret this as having a high biotic potential or a low biotic potential that we discussed the other day. R selected, they're going to be smaller in size compared to the K selected. K selected organisms are going to have a large body size. Are selected, they're going to mature early in life. So they may be able to reproduce and have offspring as soon as they are born, where K selected, it may take a couple years for these organisms to be able to reproduce. Short lifespan for your R selected, so comparable to your K, they don't live for very long. K selected is going to have a longer lifespan. So they're going to live for longer periods of time. R selected is going to have large broods. Brood is a number of offspring every time that the female is going to basically reproduce. So if you have lots and lots of brood, like lots of offspring, you're going to have a large brood. K selected means you're going to have less offspring, so small broods. And then R selected, little or no parental care. K selected is going to have high parental care. And so if you look at these two, you can just think about evolution and natural selection, about how animals here who are going to be R selected, they are going to live a short time. They're going to reproduce very early on. They're going to have many, many offspring, and they're not going to take care of their offspring. They're kind of using all of their energy in reproduction, whereas K selected, they're going to develop later in life. They're going to have few offspring, and the energy is going to be used to take care of the offspring, to make sure that those offspring, the few that they do have, make it to reproductive age so that they can pass on their genes. So hopefully you can look at these two categories and try and think of some examples that would fall into each. And so R selected, you can think bacteria, insects would be an example. K selected, we're thinking humans, elephants, the giant panda, which we talked about the other day. And like I said, these seem very cut and dry. And there are some animals that kind of fall into both categories. So these are very general. If you think of like a turtle, for instance, turtles and tortoises, they can live for long periods of time, but they're smaller. And so you can find animals that kind of have characteristics of both. This is very, very general. Okay, so survivorship. We have three types of survivorship that you should be able to identify on a graph and also be able to describe. So survivorship, you can see the definition, the probability that a given individual in a population will survive to a particular age. And many insurance companies, they actually are going to develop the price of life insurance based on human survivorship. So if a person has a very risky lifestyle, they like to, for example, go skydiving, they speed, maybe they drink, they smoke, we kind of predict that they're going to die at a younger age than somebody who's not so risky. So not only do we do this in nature to try and classify organisms, but Like I said, insurance companies also are going to try and predict how long you are going to survive. So if you look at my graph here, we have three types. Notice that the y-axis is a logarithm scale. You guys are familiar with that because you graphed your LD50 on a logarithm scale. And we also have our age on our x-axis. We don't really have any numbers here, young and old. And you should know that type 1 survivorship is when we have, for example, people or animals that are going to live a long life and they're going to die when they're old. So they have a high probability of living when they're young, and really they're just going to die because of old age. So they're able to survive most of their life. They have the same probability of living until old, then they end up dying. So you could think K-selected organisms kind of fit the type 1 survivorship curve here. So we have humans, you could think like elephants, like I said, giant panda. Type 3 survivorship, I'm going to skip over to for right now. Type 3 survivorship, you can see that the probability of death is high young, so early on in life. So it's very likely that this animal or organism is going to die at a young age, but if they get past being young, then they're able to survive for a long period of time. And so fish are a great example of this. Many aquatic organisms, they lay lots and lots of eggs, and then in the fish's larval stages, they're very small. They're likely to be eaten by predators, but once they get bigger and they go out into the ocean, then they're able to survive for a long period of time. So once they've grown into their mature size, they're able to survive for a long period of time. And then type 2, you can see here, type 2, it's kind of not understood as well as the other two types, but basically the probability is always the same that the animal is going to die. The age is not going to affect the survivorship of an organism in type 2. And so some ecologists will put different types of lizards into type 2. So it doesn't matter how old they are, they just have the same chance of dying throughout their life. So type 1, you live a long time, you die at old age. Type 3, you're more likely to die when you're young, but if you get past your young stage, you're able to survive for a long time. And type 2, age does not affect your probability of dying. You're just consistently dying your whole life. Like we said with the R and K selected, many animals are going to exhibit more than one type of survivorship. So if you look at this graph here, you can see a herring gull, and you can see the age. And you can see that it's likely that the chicks of a herring gull are going to be killed early on in life. So the chicks, they're really small, lots of predators, other birds can come and eat the chicks, and so it's kind of likely that they're going to die at a young age. But once they get past that very young age, they're able to fly, they become bigger, then their age has no effect on when they're going to die. So they have the same chance of dying throughout the rest of their life. So they exhibit two types of survivorship. That would be type 3 and type 2. All right, human population. This is what we're going to discuss for basically the rest of this chapter and the next chapter. And I just defined demography for you, the science of population structure and growth. And as we discussed, our population, human population, is a J curve currently. So we're currently seeing exponential growth. As you look at my graph here, this is from your textbook, a little outdated. 2008, we had 6.7 billion people. Please be aware that today we have over 7 billion people on Earth. So that's a number that you should be aware of. Should be pretty easy for you to remember that. That's something that you may be asked on an AP exam or asked to use in a math problem. So 7 billion people, more than 7 billion people on Earth today. And as you can see here, our population has been growing exponentially. I have this picture up here because this is showing you someone who has contracted the plague, and that has to do with our Black Death, our little blip here in the 14th century, where we saw basically a third of Europe ended up dying from the Black Plague, or Black Death, excuse me. and it's also wiped out populations in Asia. And so we see a little blip here, but for the most part, our population has been increasing exponentially, and we're still waiting to see when this population is going to make a logistic curve or eventually make our S curve, when we're going to hit that carrying capacity. This is actually from last year. So you can see last year, 2013, basically the same date, that our population in the United States, you should know it's more than 310 million people, and world population, you can always estimate around 7 billion people. So just have an idea of these two numbers. They're important numbers to keep in mind. So rapid growth in our population, primarily due to drop in death rates. This is showing you a graph of Mexico, the birth and the death rates in Mexico from 1900 to 2000, and the rate per 1,000 population. And you can see our birth rates and our death rates here. And we're going to start to discuss the demographic transition model. We'll discuss that on Monday. But as you can see here in the early 1900s, our birth rates and death rates were both very high. And then really we started to see a decline in our death rates. And we'll talk about the reasons as to why the birth rates and death rates were high. But I'm sure you can guess a few, especially if you've had AP Human. But you know, our birth rates are high. We have high infant mortality rates. We have lack of medical care. Our death rates are high. We have war, we have plague, we have famine, we have disease. And it's really keeping our population low and stable at this time. And then as you start to enter into the next stage of the demographic transition model, which, like I said, if you're unsure about what this is, we're going to discuss this in detail on Monday. But the first thing that happens here is our death rates start to decline. And so we see better sanitation, and this happened between 1925 and 1950, you can see in Mexico. Sanitation increased. We have access to fresh water. We're starting to use agriculture in order to provide food for the people who live there. And our birth rates really still remain high for the same reasons as it was high early on in our population here. And then as you move through the demographic transition model, you can see that the birth rates are actually going to decline, and eventually when you're in the final stage or the fourth stage, which is what our book basically recognizes, even though we'll talk about a possible fifth stage, the birth rates start to decline, and they'll actually meet the death rate. But right here we see the overall population growth. So it's due to our death rates dropping and our birth rates remaining high. And as you hopefully can remember, I told you that currently our growth rate for Earth is about 1.2%. So we're still growing. So a term that you should be familiar with, zero population growth, or ZPG. Right here you can see that's when the birth rates are actually going to equal the death rate. If we're looking country by country, we've already seen this happen. So we'll talk about countries that are even declining in population, but we've already seen this begin. But our birth rates and death rates are equal, and so we're looking to see when that's going to happen. When are we going to reach our carrying capacity? And so we have estimations here, and many estimations, they're just estimations. There's nothing concrete about it. The UN predicts that the growth rate will decrease to ZPG sometime this century. And as you can see here, this graph here, these are some projections by the UN or the United Nations. Takes into account fertility rates declining, takes into account AIDS and HIV, but these are just projections. So who knows where our carrying capacity is. Maybe we've overshot our carrying capacity, and you can see that I extended the lines here. 7.7 billion seems pretty low for us to start to hit our carrying capacity. 9.1 billion, 10.6, that's a high projection. And who knows, it could be 14 billion people. But we're just trying to predict when we're going to level out here. Okay, so this is pretty easy stuff, and we've actually kind of already talked about this. But we're just going to differentiate between developed and developing countries. And if you look at my map here, you can see that the blue, that's going to be your highly developed countries. So you have United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. These are the countries that we have that are highly developed and they have low birth rates, as you can see on the screen. So they all have low birth rates because women are educated, people are getting married later in life. We have low infant mortality rates in our highly developed countries. We have modern medicine. Women can have children in hospitals. Um, there's a lot of prenatal care, so infant mortality rate is low. Our life expectancy is high, so we expect to live until our 70s and 80 years old. Per capita income is high. We're looking at the United States. You'll see a statistic on one of these slides coming up, but it's around $53,000 per person, so pretty high in the United States. And some examples, some concrete examples of highly developed countries: United States, Canada, France, Germany, Sweden, Australia, and Japan. All of these are considered highly developed. Moving to our developing countries, we fall into two categories. We have our moderately developed. We have our moderately developed countries. Some examples, you can see Mexico, Turkey, Thailand, most of South America, India, China, and Brazil. All of the orange countries here are considered moderately developed. So you can see Northern Africa. These are kind of in between countries, and we're going to actually compare the statistics between a highly developed country, a moderately developed country, and a less developed country on the next slide. So some examples of our less developed countries, you can see them in red here. Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. These are the areas where we see basically the poorest countries in the world, the least amount of infrastructure, the high birth rates and infant mortality rates, high total fertility rates, which we'll define that in a couple slides. But Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Cambodia, you should just think Sub-Saharan Africa here, in Southeast Asia. This is where we have our developing countries, or our less developed. This table is pretty old. I think it says 2008 here. I have an updated table in a couple minutes here, but most populated countries in the world. So notice these, I think these are our top 10 you can see, and even though these numbers are slightly different for the number of people, the order currently is still the same. So China, India, United States top our top 3. Something that you need to remember is that we also need to remember the most densely populated country, and that would be Bangladesh down here. So you can see Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world. But we think by 2050 that India is going to pass China, and we're also going to see some changes down here as well. So this order will change by 2050. This is just showing you China's, you can see population growth rate as of 2012, 0.5%. You can see India here is 1.3% in the green line. So we can see that China is growing, I guess, slower than India. India is growing faster, so we're going to see India become the most populated country in the world. The United States here at about 0.7%. And then here's the table I was talking about, the top 10 countries with the highest population. So this is currently the same lineup that we saw from your textbook, but if you look over here for 2050, we see we're projecting that India is definitely going to pass China as the most populated country. We also see some shakeups down here as well. You can see that Pakistan will pass Brazil, and Nigeria will also pass Brazil. So there'll be some changes in our top 10 in the order. But currently, China, India, United States are your 3 most populated countries. Bangladesh is the most densely populated country, and by 2050 we predict that India will pass China. And I'm going to stop here. So we'll discuss this table in your textbook on Monday.